Mr. Speaker, one of the most important elements of this republic is the ability of the people to understand and to remember the public actions and record of those they elect. This is vital to government accountability, to historical accuracy, and to the future direction of the future generations of this country. So, Mr. Speaker, what follows is the record and legacy of President Barack Obama. And I ask unanimous consent to have my full statement entered into the record. Without objection. Last night, Mr. Speaker, President Barack Obama gave his farewell address to the nation. In his speech, President Obama praised American exceptionalism for the very first time since his presidency began. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, much of the remainder of the President's speech was far removed from reality. Mr. Obama implied that his presidency had increased trust and respect for America. Yet the truth is that under Mr. Obama's presidency, the trust and respect that both friend and foe alike previously had for America has been demonstrably diminished across the world. Mr. Obama, in fact, weakened our economy and led the most anemic military campaign in our history. So, Mr. Speaker, let us now recall the grand promise of candidate Barack Obama, bedecked with Greek columns and the rhetoric of bipartisan unity as it was. And let's compare it to the actual legacy of President Barack Obama, the partisan heckler at home and the lead from behind, apologize for America academic abroad, who was ever more eager to force Catholic nuns to buy birth control than he was to fight the ruthless butchers of the Islamic State. Mr. Speaker, President Barack Obama has taken credit for a growing economy, but after his failed stimulus, his was the worst economic recovery in the history of America. And his presidency will be the first in modern times whose 8 years in office will fail to include even 1 year of 3% economic growth. Under Barack Obama's presidency, the number of long-term unemployed eclipsed 15 million for the very first time in history. Today, 95 million Americans, the highest number in history, are now not in the workforce in America. And according to the latest numbers from the Census Bureau, household incomes fell by more than $2,100 in inflation-adjusted terms. 45.3 million Americans, the highest number in history, Mr. Speaker, now live in poverty. More than 43 million Americans were receiving food stamps under Barack Obama, the highest number in history. Barack Obama single-handedly added almost as much deficit to the national debt as all of the other presidents in the 240-year history of the United States of America combined. And Standard & Poor's downgraded the U.S. government from its AAA credit rating for the very first time in history. Mr. Obama's signature policy achieved what was called the Affordable Care Act. And as we have learned year after year, essentially nothing Mr. Obama said about the Affordable Care Act was true. Obamacare contained over $1 trillion in new taxes, which was the largest tax increase in history. Yet millions remain uninsured, health care costs have never been higher, and the entire debacle called Obamacare is now catastrophically collapsing before our very eyes. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Obama engineered the sequester on the military, which had a devastating consequence on our men and women in uniform and our ability to fight and to win wars when necessary. Mr. Obama's was the opposite of a commitment to peace through strength. When it came to justice at home, Mr. Speaker, Barack Obama told us that adult male transvestites had the moral right and the legal right to go into the bathroom with little schoolgirls, whether their parents liked it or not. He fundamentally sought to abrogate religious freedom in America. He weaponized the Internal Revenue Service, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Attorney General's Office, and the Justice Department against America's own citizens. It was and is the epitome of tyranny. Mr. Obama unconstitutionally ignored and selectively applied America's immigration laws and illegally suspended immigration enforcement. He released 19,720 illegal immigrants from prison into nearly every state of the Union. These nearly 20,000 criminal, illegal aliens were collectively convicted of over 60,000 crimes, including over 12,000 drunk driving convictions and over 8,000 violent crimes such as assault, rape, and murder. Mr. Obama's actions endangered Americans and denied justice to the victims of their crimes. And Mr. Obama bears a share of the responsibility for every crime that these criminals have committed or will commit against Americans since he released them from prison into American society. But, Mr. Speaker, perhaps Mr. Obama's most egregious broken promise to all Americans is when he said, "I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear that I will execute the office of President of the United States faithfully and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States." Since then, he has shown complete and open contempt for the Constitution. Barack Obama blatantly stoked racial tensions in America, and in the process, he painted a deadly target on the backs of the noble men and women in blue who risk their lives every day to protect the innocent citizens of this nation. Barack Obama consistently subjected Americans to condescending lectures. If we opposed Obamacare, we didn't want people to have health insurance. If we opposed wasteful stimulus spending, we hated school teachers and firemen. If we opposed the nuclear deal with Iran, we were compared to terrorists sponsoring Iranian mullahs. If we believed in God and exercised our Second Amendment, we were bitter. If we didn't believe in open, unsecured borders and vetting those who came into this country, we were un-American. If we believed in protecting unborn baby girls from being killed simply because they're little girls, we were waging war on women. And Mr. Obama was also fond of using politically correct euphemisms and constantly using them to distort nearly every issue. Evacuation of our embassy in Yemen was a reduction in staff. Terror attacks are, quote, man-caused disasters. The global war on terror is overseas contingency operations. An Islamic terrorist murdering 13 American soldiers is workplace violence. Terrorists beheading children, crucifying women, and burning men alive in the name of Islam are individuals from various religions who practice hateful ideologies. Veterans, pro-life groups, and states' rights advocates were listed as at risk to become domestic terrorists. And Mr. Speaker, from day one, Barack Obama considered the Cold War a giant misunderstanding. He did his famous reset with Russia and then turned and caved into everything that they wanted. Mr. Obama's policies of weakness and appeasement yielded Crimea, the South China Sea, the rise of the Islamic State, the return of Iran, and the unspeakable desecration of thousands upon thousands of innocent people in Aleppo, where the result to date is now over 4 million refugees and 400,000 people dead. And during the so-called Arab Spring, the Obama administration sided with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. At the end of the Obama administration, the only countries in the world that we have better relations with are Iran and Cuba. And even that has been entirely on their terms. Mr. Speaker, the average number of innocents killed by terrorists before the Obama presidency was approximately 3,000 per year in the world. And now, under Barack Obama, it is approximately 30,000 every year. Mr. Obama labeled the Islamic State a junior varsity team and then stood by with a golf club in his hand while ISIS raped and butchered and beheaded its way across Iraq, selling little 6-year-old girls into slavery, burning people alive, and perpetrating a genocide against Christians and Yazidis. The Islamic State now keeps an estimated 3,000 girls and women in sexual slavery, while Mr. Obama runs out the clock on his term of office and hands the fight against ISIS off to the next president. Because of his delusional negotiation and acquiescence, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the #1 sponsor of terrorism in this world, may place the finger of jihad on the launch button of an entire nuclear arsenal. And America's children and future generations may thereafter be forced to live their lives in the shadow of nuclear terrorism. Mr. Obama stood before a group of thousands of supporters of Israel and proclaimed, quote, "When the chips are down, I have Israel's back." But then as president, he blatantly refused even to acknowledge Jerusalem as Israel's capital and consistently expressed more open rebuke toward Israel than he did toward Iran for building an entire nuclear effort to someday threaten the world. I'm going to say that again, Mr. Speaker. As president, Mr. Obama blatantly refused to even acknowledge Israel as Israel's capital. He refused to acknowledge Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And he consistently expressed more open rebuke toward Israel for building houses in its capital city than he expressed for Iran's efforts to build nuclear weapons with which to existentially threaten Israel, along with the peace and security of the entire human family. In the political safety of his lame duck, he orchestrated and failed to veto a resolution that undermines Israel's very right to exist. Mr. Speaker, it was a cowardly act of political treachery that disgraced the United States, and it will send Barack Obama's name down the corridor of history as an overt traitor to the state of Israel. When the Security Council Quartet meets on January 15th and the full United Nations Security Council meets on January 17th, I am gravely concerned that Barack Obama will overturn U.S. precedent going back to Lyndon Johnson and use the opportunity to stab Israel in the back one final time by allowing the anti-Semites at the UN to attempt to redraw the map of Israel to indefensible pre-1967 borders, which, Mr. Speaker, would leave the world's only Jewish state less than 9 miles wide. Mr. Speaker, no government leader has any greater responsibility than that of protecting the innocent. Yet Mr. Obama stood by and allowed not only ISIS, Boko Haram, Russia, and Syria, but also Planned Parenthood to brutally desecrate the innocent on a horrific scale. President Barack Obama went to great effort against taxpayers' wishes to give billions of taxpayer dollars to Planned Parenthood to expand abortion on demand in America and throughout the world, and to proactively promote policies to allow the indiscriminate killing of these, the most defenseless of all human beings. As president, he appointed an empire of radically pro-abortion judges and government bureaucrats. When he was in the state legislature, Barack Obama actually voted no 4 times on a bill that would have protected babies after they were born alive. In the U.S. Senate, Mr. Obama voted no on a bill that would have prohibited someone from taking a minor child out of state for an abortion without even notifying the child's parents. He vowed to veto the Prenatal Non-Discrimination Act, which would prohibit discriminating against an unborn baby girl by subjecting her to an abortion simply because she's a little girl instead of a little boy. He promised to veto the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, a bill that would have protected both mothers and their little pain-capable babies between the beginning of their 6th month of pregnancy from the unspeakable cruelty of Planned Parenthood and evil monsters like Kermit Gosnell. Mr. Speaker, perhaps most astonishingly, Barack Obama, the President of the United States and the leader of the free world, wrote a letter to Congress and said he would veto the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act to protect breathing, crying, kicking, born alive human babies if it ever reached his desk. Mr. Speaker, could not the President have agreed that little human babies who survive abortion and are born alive should be protected? President Barack Obama's record is crystal clear. For his entire political life, he has strongly supported the full legalization of abortion on demand throughout all 9 months of pregnancy for any reason or no reason, including sex selection throughout all 9 months of pregnancy and forcing American taxpayers to pay for it whether the taxpayers liked it or not. Under Barack Obama, nearly 9 million innocent, defenseless little American babies were aborted before they ever saw the first smile of their mother. Ironically, President Obama was in the unique position, perhaps among all other presidents in history, to bring this country together to protect these helpless little children. Yet as the most powerful human being in the world, Mr. Obama chose to become the most powerful enemy of the most helpless human beings in the world. And nothing will stain his legacy or his claims of looking out for the little guy with more shame than going down in history as the abortion president. Mr. Speaker, it gives me no pleasure to lay out this record. I truly and sincerely hoped for God's best for Barack Obama when he took office. I wrote him a letter hoping that he would be remembered as someone that stood up for the Constitution and stood up for the innocent. But in a republic like ours, where the people are the final arbiters of our public policy, and where those who would subvert this republic consistently resort to deception and historical revisionism, an accurate record is vital to our nation's survival and its future generations. So alas, Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid Barack Obama tragically wasted his precious and historic opportunity. However, this is the true record of President Barack Obama. And to paraphrase William Wilberforce, we may choose to look the other way, but we can never again say that we did not know. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.